The silence in the square stretched for what felt like hours as Yunsung held his blade against Dravik's throat, and the visitors, children of the quiet, watched with expressions that ranged from eager anticipation to quiet grief to something that looked almost like hope. "Do it," Dravik said through teeth clenched against the pain from his wounds. "Finish what you started. Take your revenge and be done with it. I would expect nothing less from a worthy enemy." Yunsung was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft and tired, and much older than any 16-year-old's voice should ever sound. "My parents were not warriors," Yunsung said slowly. "They were teachers who wanted to help people learn and grow and become better than they were before. They believed that knowledge was the greatest gift anyone could give to another being." He lowered his blade slightly, but did not remove it from Dravik's throat entirely. "I was angry for a very long time after they died," Yunsung continued. "I wanted to hurt everyone who had ever been part of the Valkyrie Dominion. I wanted to burn your worlds and kill your families and make you feel the same emptiness that I felt every night when I went to sleep alone." "Then do it," Dravik repeated. But there was something different in his voice now. Something that might have been confusion or curiosity about why he was still alive when any sensible enemy would have killed him already. "But that is not what my parents would have wanted," Yunsung said. "They would have wanted me to be better than my anger, better than my grief, better than the hatred that tried to consume me in those first terrible months after they were gone." He stepped back and lowered his blade completely, deactivating the plasma edge and letting the weapon hang at his side. The children around the square shifted uneasily, because this was not how they had imagined this moment would end after all their planning and preparing, and waiting for the chance to strike back against the empire that had taken so much from them. "I am not going to kill you, Commander Dravik-san," Yunsung said clearly so that everyone in the square could hear him. "Why not?" Dravik demanded, his confusion now obvious in his voice and his posture. "I am your enemy. I commanded the attack that killed your parents. I have ordered the deaths of thousands of humans across this sector of space, because killing you would make me just like you," Yunsung answered simply, "and I refuse to become what I hate. I refuse to let your cruelty transform me into a monster who thinks that death is the answer to every problem." He turned to address the children gathered around them, his voice growing stronger as he spoke words that he had clearly been thinking about for a very long time. "We fought tonight to protect our home and our people," Yunsung said. "We fought because we had no choice but to defend ourselves against an enemy who came to enslave us. But we do not fight to become conquerors ourselves. We do not fight to spread the same suffering that was inflicted upon us." The children listened in silence, their young faces illuminated by the first light of dawn that was beginning to paint the eastern sky in colors of pink and gold. "We are going to let Commander Dravik and his surviving soldiers leave this world," Yunsung announced, "and they are going to carry a message back to the Valkyrie Dominion." He turned back to face Dravik, who had risen slowly to his feet and was looking at the human boy with an expression that might have been respect or bewilderment or some combination of emotions that Valkyrie faces were not designed to display. "The message is this," Yunsung said clearly. "We do not kneel, we do not break, and we do not forget. But we also do not become the evil we fight against. Every child you orphan becomes a soldier in our cause. Every colony you burn becomes a training ground for our resistance. You cannot conquer humanity by killing our parents, because you only make our children stronger." Dravik stared at the boy who had defeated him in combat and then chosen to spare his life when he had every reason to demand blood payment for all the suffering the Dominion had caused. Why show mercy to an enemy who would never show mercy to you? Dravik asked quietly. "Because that is what makes us different from you," Yunsung answered. That is what makes us human. We can choose to be better than our worst moments. We can choose to break the cycle of violence instead of continuing it forever. We can choose mercy even when mercy is not deserved. He gestured toward the edge of the colony, where Belthry transport ships waited to carry the defeated occupation force back to their fleet. Go home. Commander, Yunsung said. Tell your leaders what happened here. Tell them that the children they orphaned are watching, waiting, preparing for every attempt they make to harm our people. Tell them that we will never stop fighting for our freedom and our families and our right to exist in this galaxy. Dravik hesitated for a long moment, looking at the children who had humiliated his forces and brought him to his knees with nothing but courage and determination and an unshakable belief that they could change their own destiny. Then he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement that no Belthry commander had ever made to a human before. I will deliver your message, Dravik said. And then he turned and walked slowly toward the transport ships with the survivors of his occupation force following behind him as the Belthry ships lifted off and climbed toward the fleet waiting in orbit. A transmission began broadcasting on frequencies used by the Quiet across all of occupied space. It was a simple message. Just a few words repeated over and over. New Meridian is free. Who is next? Yunsung stood among the children who had become his family, watching the enemy ships disappear into the brightening sky. And for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to feel something other than grief and anger and the cold determination to survive. He felt Hopominji stepped up beside him and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his with a trust that made his heart ache with the responsibility he felt for all of these young souls who looked to him for guidance. What do we do now? She asked. Quietly, Insang looked at her and at all the other children who had fought so bravely and suffered so much and still refused to let their pain turn them into the monsters they opposed. Now we rebuild, he said. Now we heal. Now we prepare for whatever comes next, and we do it together. As a family, the colonists were emerging from their hiding places, looking around at the aftermath of the battle with wonder and gratitude and tears streaming down their faces as they realized that they were still free. The children of the Quiet had given them that gift, had paid for their freedom with years of grief and training and sacrifice that no child should ever have to endure. And somewhere in the stars, aboard a ship carrying defeated Belthry soldiers back to their empire, Commander Dravik-san sat alone in his quarters and thought about a human boy who had chosen mercy over vengeance. He thought about a smile that had promised something terrifying and delivered something even more dangerous to the Dominion's ambitions than any weapon or any army could ever be. He thought about hoping for the first time in his long career of conquest and violence. Dravik-san wondered if his people had made a terrible mistake when they decided to make enemies of humanity. Dravik activated his own plasma blade, a weapon 3 times the size of the one Yunsung carried. And for a moment, the square was illuminated by the twin lights of blue and gold as the two combatants faced each other across a distance of less than 10 feet. I have fought in 40 campaigns, Dravik said as he shifted into a combat stance that had served him well against warriors much larger and more experienced than this human child. I have killed thousands of beings with my own hands. You cannot possibly believe you can defeat me in single combat. Yunsung did not answer with words. Instead, he moved, launching himself at the massive Belthry commander with a speed that seemed to defy the physical limitations of his small human body. Dravik swung his blade in a powerful arc that should have cut the boy in half. But Yunsung was no longer where the blade passed through the air, having ducked beneath the attack and rolled to Dravik's left side before the commander could adjust his stance. The boy's smaller blade flickered out and scored a line across the joint in Dravik's knee armor. Not deep enough to cause serious damage, but enough to prove that Dravik was not as untouchable as he had believed. Impossible. Dravik snarled as he spun to face the boy again. "You fight like a soldier," Yunsung said, circling slowly around the larger opponent with his blade held low and ready. "You learned in academies and training grounds where everything was controlled and predictable, where your opponents fought by rules and traditions that everyone understood." Dravik attacked again, a combination of strikes that would have overwhelmed any trained warrior. But Yunsung seemed to flow around each attack like smoke, avoiding a grasping hand. Never quite where the blade expected him to be, always moving, always watching. "We learned differently," Yunsung continued as he ducked another swing and lashed out at Dravik's weapon hand, missing by inches, but forcing the commander to step back defensively. "We learned in the ruins of our homes and the wreckage of our families. We learned that there are no rules in survival, only what works and what fails." Around them, the sounds of fighting continued as the children of the quiet systematically dismantled the Velthari occupation force with tactics that no military academy had ever taught, because no military academy had ever imagined that children could become weapons. Dravik's remaining soldiers fought back with all their training and experience, but they could not adapt to enemies who did not behave like enemies, who appeared from impossible angles, who used toys and tools and everyday objects as weapons, who showed no fear because they had already lost everything worth fearing for. "Your people believe that war is about strength and firepower and superior technology," Yunsung said as he pressed his attack, his movements becoming faster and more aggressive as he sensed the commander tiring. "But humans know something different. We know that war is about will, about how much you are willing to sacrifice, about whether you can keep fighting when there is nothing left but the fight itself." Dravik managed to land a glancing blow on Yunsung's shoulder that sent the boy stumbling back with a hiss of pain. But even as he pressed his advantage, the commander found himself being herded, guided toward a corner of the square where the darkness was deepest. He realized too late that this had been Yunsung's plan all along, to draw him away from his troops, to isolate him in a position where his size and strength became disadvantages rather than assets. "My parents taught me something before they died," Yunsung said as he recovered his balance and raised his blade again. "They taught me that humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the smartest or the most advanced. But we have something that other species do not understand." "And what is that?" Dravik demanded as he tried to find an angle of attack that would end this fight quickly. "We do not know when to quit," Yunsung answered simply. "We do not accept defeat. We do not surrender our children to despair. We do not stop fighting just because the odds are against us. And most importantly, we do not forgive those who hurt the people we love." He attacked with renewed fury, his blade a blur of blue light that Dravik could barely track. And the commander found himself retreating step by step as the human child pushed him back with a ferocity that seemed to burn like fire in those dark young eyes. The fight lasted for several more minutes, but its outcome had already been decided in that moment when Dravik realized that he was not fighting a child at all. He was fighting a force of nature, a manifestation of human grief and human rage and human love, transformed into something that could not be stopped by any weapon or any army. When Yunsung's blade finally found its mark, slipping past Dravik's defenses and piercing the gap between his chest plate and shoulder armor, the commander fell to his knees with a sound that was half growl and half groan of pain. The children stopped fighting throughout the colony as word spread that their leader had brought down the enemy commander. They gathered in the square once again, dozens of young faces watching as Yunsung stood over the kneeling Velthari warrior with his blade pressed against the alien's throat. "Now," Yunsung said quietly as he looked down at the creature who had ordered the death of his parents and so many other parents across human space. You will learn what it feels like to kneel before someone you thought was helpless. Dravik looked up at the boy, expecting to see the bloodlust and hatred that he would have felt in the same position. The desire for vengeance that would drive any warrior to finish a defeated enemy. But Yunsung's eyes held something else entirely. Something that Dravik could not identify, but that frightened him more than any weapon or any threat. It looked almost like mercy. Chaos erupted in the darkness as Velthara soldiers activated their helmet lights and shouted commands at each other in their harsh native language that sounded like rocks grinding against metal. Dravik roared orders for his troops to find the boy and secure the square. But when the beams of light swept across the place where Yunsung had been standing just moments before, they found nothing but empty air and shadows. "Find him," Dravik bellowed. "Find all of them and kill anyone who resists." But finding anyone in the sudden darkness proved much harder than the commander expected, because the colony had become a maze of black corridors and silent buildings where every sound echoed strangely and every shadow seemed to move when the birthday soldiers looked away. The colonists, who had been kneeling in the square, scattered in the confusion, running to their homes and hiding places, while the Velthari troops tried to maintain order and failed completely. "Commander, our communications are down," one of Dravik's officers reported, his voice tight with fear that he was trying very hard to hide. "I cannot reach the ships in orbit or any of our patrol units around the settlement." "That is impossible," Dravik snarled. "Our equipment is hardened against electronic interference. Nothing on this primitive world should be able to block our signals. Nevertheless, Commander, we are cut off," the officer insisted. Dravik looked around at the darkness pressing in from all sides and felt something he had not experienced since he was a young soldier on his first battlefield many decades ago. He felt like prey. A scream echoed from somewhere to his left, the unmistakable sound of a Velthari warrior in pain and terror, followed by a heavy crash as a body in full armor fell to the ground. "Squad 7. Report." Dravik called out into his communicator, but received only static in response. Another scream came from his right, then another from behind him, then silence that seemed even more frightening than the sounds of violence. "What is happening?" one of his soldiers demanded, his weapon shaking in his hands as he pointed it at shadows that refused to stay still. "Stay calm and maintain formation," Dravik ordered. But even he could hear the uncertainty creeping into his own voice. From the darkness came a soft sound that made every Velthari soldier freeze in place. It was humming, the gentle sound of children humming a simple melody together, coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, as if the night itself had learned to sing. "They are just children," Dravik shouted to his troops. "They cannot hurt us. We are warriors of the Dominion." But his words rang hollow because his soldiers were disappearing one by one, pulled into the darkness by hands they never saw, taken down by attacks that came from angles that should have been impossible. A figure emerged from the shadows in front of Dravik, and for a moment the commander thought it was Yunsung returning to continue their confrontation. But this was a different child, a girl who looked even younger than Yunsung, with bright eyes that reflected the dim light from Velthari helmets scattered on the ground around fallen soldiers. "My name is Minji," the girl said in a voice that was sweet and gentle and absolutely terrifying in its calmness. "My brother was killed at Brennan's World 2 years ago. He was 12 years old, and he loved to draw pictures of spaceships." She held up a small device in her hand that Dravik recognized as a Velthari shock grenade, a weapon that could disable electronics and stun organic beings within a wide radius. "I took this from one of your soldiers," Minji continued. "He did not need it anymore." She pressed the activation button and threw the grenade at a cluster of Velthari troops before vanishing back into the shadows with a speed that seemed impossible. For such a small person, the grenade detonated with a flash of blue light, and 3 more soldiers collapsed to the ground. Their armor systems overloaded, and their bodies temporarily paralyzed. More children emerged from the darkness throughout the colony, appearing and disappearing like ghosts made of determination and grief and righteous anger. They ranged in age from as young as 11 to as old as 17. And every single one of them wore the same expression of calm focus that Dravik had seen on Yunsung's face in the square. They moved through the colony like water flowing around stones, never engaging the Vulturi soldiers directly when they could avoid it. Instead, using the environment and their knowledge of every building and pathway to outmaneuver troops who would train for open warfare against adult opponents. One boy disabled the power coupling on a Vulturi transport vehicle, trapping the soldiers inside. When the doors locked automatically, a pair of twin girls used mirrors to redirect Vulturi, targeting lasers back at the soldiers who fired them, causing weapons to overheat and explode in their owner's hands. A teenage boy who could not have weighed more than 50 kilograms dropped from a rooftop onto a Vulturi sergeant and used the sergeant's own knife to cut the power cables in his armor before disappearing into an air vent that was too small for any adult to follow. They know everything about this colony. Dravik's remaining officer gasped as they retreated toward the square where they hoped to establish a defensive position. They know every tunnel and crawl space and shadow. Of course they do, Dravik realized with horror. They have been here for months preparing for this. We walked into a trap the children designed for us. Yunsung appeared again, stepping out of the darkness directly in front of Dravik with that same smile on his face. But now he was holding a Vulturi plasma blade, the ceremonial weapon that officers carried as a symbol of their rank. And Dravik recognized it as belonging to his own second-in-command, who he had not seen since the lights went out. Your people taught us an important lesson, Yunsung said as more children gathered behind him, emerging from the shadows like an army of small vengeful spirits. You taught us that the galaxy is not safe, that no one will protect us, that we have to protect each other. You are children, Dravik said. But the words sounded foolish even to his own ears. We were children, Yunsung corrected him gently. Now we are something else. Something you created when you killed our parents and left us alone in a universe that does not care about orphans. He raised the plasma blade, its blue light illuminating his young face and the faces of the children standing with him. Now, Commander Dravik-san, Yunsung said quietly, let us show you what human children become when they have nothing left to lose. Dravik stared at the human boy for a long moment, trying to understand what could possibly make this small creature act with such confidence when he should be trembling and begging for his life like sensible beings always did when faced with Vulturi power. You have been waiting for me. Dravik repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them for hidden meaning. What nonsense is this, child? Do you think this is some kind of game that you can win with clever words and foolish smiles? Yunsung's smile did not waver even slightly as he looked up at the massive alien commander who could crush him with one hand, if he chose to do so. Tell me something, Commander, Yunsung said in that same calm voice that made Dravik feel strangely unsettled in ways he could not explain. Do you know what happened to the garrison your people stationed on Outpost 7 about 6 months ago? Dravik's 4 eyes blinked in surprise because he had not expected this human child to know anything about military matters happening on distant worlds far from this simple farming colony. That facility was destroyed by enemy forces, Dravik answered carefully. Intelligence suggested it was the work of the Crethony Empire, or perhaps raiders from the outer territories. And what about the occupation force you sent to Brennan's world? Yunsung continued as if he had not heard Dravik's response. 3,000 soldiers vanished in a single night without sending a single distress signal or firing a single weapon. Is that not strange to you? Dravik felt his irritation transforming into something colder and more cautious, because the boy was speaking about classified information that no civilian should possess. How do you know about these things? Dravik demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. I know about the armored division that was sent to pacify the human settlements in the Kepler system too, Yunsung said, and his smile grew wider. 40 tanks and 2,000 of your finest soldiers reduced to nothing but empty armor and silence in less than 12 hours. Your commanders must have been very confused about what kind of weapon could do such damage without leaving any evidence. The colonists in the square were watching this exchange with wide eyes and open mouths, because they had never heard of these events and could not understand how young Yunsung Park, the quiet orphan boy who worked the hydroponic farms and kept to himself, could possibly know secrets of galactic war forever. And soldiers shifted nervously because they had heard rumors about the mysterious losses their forces had suffered over the past 2 years. Losses that High Command attributed to various enemies, but could never properly explain. You are bluffing, Dravik said. But there was a new tone in his voice that had not been there before. You are a child on a farming world with no access to military intelligence. You are simply trying to frighten me with stories you cannot possibly verify. Am I? Yunsung asked softly, and something in his eyes changed, becoming harder and older than any 16-year-old's eyes should ever be. Your people killed my parents 3 years ago when you raided a transport ship called the Morning Star. They were teachers who were traveling to help establish a school on a new colony world. And they died because your soldiers wanted to send a message about the cost of human expansion into this sector. Dravik remembered the Morning Star operation because it had been one of his own commands. A simple raid designed to demonstrate Velthari dominance over human shipping lanes in the region. I was 13 years old when I learned that my mother and father were gone. Yunsung continued, and his voice remained calm, even as his words carried the weight of terrible grief and terrible purpose. I was alone and afraid, and I thought my life was over. Tragic, Dravik said with mock sympathy. But such is the nature of war, child. The weak suffer so that the strong may rule. This is the way of the universe. No, Yunsung said firmly. That is what you believe, but you are wrong. And I am going to prove it to you tonight. Dravik laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the square and made several of the kneeling colonists flinch in fear. You are going to prove something to me, Dravik said with amusement. A human child is going to teach a lesson to a commander of the Velthari Dominion who has conquered 17 worlds. Please tell me how you intend to accomplish this miracle. I am not alone. Yunsung said simply, I see no army behind you, Dravik replied, gesturing at the empty space around the boy. I see no weapons, no ships, no soldiers. Nothing but a foolish child who does not know when to kneel and accept his fate. Yunsung looked past Dravik to the kneeling colonists, then around the square at the Velthari soldiers positioned at every corner and entrance, and finally up at the darkening sky where the sun was beginning to set behind the alien warships that hung over the colony like steel clouds. Commander, Yunsung said quietly, your people made a mistake when you started killing our parents and orphaning our children. You assume that human young are like Velthari young, helpless and weak and unable to fight back. And they are not, Dravik asked with heavy sarcasm. We learned something very important, Yunsung said. And his smile returned, but now it looked different, sharper and more dangerous. We learned that nobody watches the children. Nobody suspects the children. Nobody guards against the children, because in every species across this galaxy, the young are kept safe and protected and far away from war. Dravik felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm evening air. But humans are different. Yunsung continued. We grow up fast when we have to. We learn to survive when there is no one left to protect us. We become whatever we need to become to keep each other safe. What are you saying? Dravik demanded. I'm saying that the attacks on Outpost 7 and Brennan's world and the Kepler settlements were not the work of your alien enemies. Yunsung answered calmly. They were carried out by children like me. Orphans you created with your raids and your conquests and your cruelty. Impossible, Dravik said. But his voice wavered. We call ourselves the Quiet, Yunsung said. And we have been waiting for you to come here for 6 months. Commander Dravik San of the Velthari Dominion. Before Dravik could respond, every light in the colony went dark at the exact same moment, plunging the square and the surrounding buildings into complete blackness, and somewhere in that darkness, Dravik heard children laughing. The ships came at dawn when the sky was still painted in soft orange and pink colors that made the farming colony of New Meridian look peaceful and beautiful. Nobody expected the attack because New Meridian was not important to anyone in the galaxy. Or so the colonists believed for many years before this terrible morning changed everything they knew about their place in the universe. The Velthari warships descended through the clouds like massive black birds made of metal and hatred. Their engines screaming so loud that children covered their ears, and mothers pulled their families into basements and storage rooms, where they hoped the aliens would not find them. Commander Dravik San stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the human settlement grow larger on his viewing screens as his fleet approached the surface below. He was a tall creature, standing nearly 8 feet high with blue-gray skin that looked like polished stone and 4 eyes that glowed with a soft yellow light. Whenever he felt strong emotions like anger or satisfaction today, he felt satisfaction because this conquest would add another human world to the Velthari Dominion's growing collection of occupied territories across this region of space. Begin the ground assault. He ordered his officers in a voice that sounded like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Within 3 hours, the colony belonged to the Dominion. The humans had no military forces to speak of. No warships hiding behind their small moon. No secret weapons buried beneath their hydroponic farms and simple homes made of recycled materials from old transport vessels. They were just farmers and traders and families trying to build lives far from the crowded cities of Earth and its older colonies where life had become too complicated and too expensive for ordinary people. Dravik transported himself to the surface once his soldiers confirmed that resistance had ended and population was ready to receive their new masters with appropriate fear and respect. He established his command center in the colony's central square, a wide-open space where the humans usually held markets and festivals and community gatherings that celebrated their harvests and holidays. Now, it would serve as the place where they would learn their new position in the universe as subjects of the Velthari Dominion. Bring them forward, Dravik commanded, and his soldiers began herding the colonists into the square like animals being led to slaughter. Though Dravik had no intention of killing them to date, dead humans could not work the farms or maintain the equipment or produce the food and resources that make conquered worlds valuable to the Dominion's expansion efforts. He wanted them alive and obedient and broken in spirit, so they would serve without causing problems for his occupation forces. You will kneel before me, Dravik announced to the gathered crowd of humans, his voice amplified by technology built into his ceremonial armor that made him look even more impressive and terrifying than his natural appearance already accomplished. You will swear loyalty to the Velthari Dominion and accept your place as our subjects from this day forward until the end of your miserable lives. The colonists looked at each other with fear in their eyes and despair in their hearts because they knew they had no choice but to obey this monster who had taken their home and their freedom in a single morning. One by one they began to kneel, pressing their knees into the dirt of the square where they had once danced and laughed and celebrated being alive and free on this world. they had built with their own hands. Dravik watched with satisfaction as the humans submitted to his authority. Their heads bowed and their spirits crushed, exactly as he had intended when he planned this operation many weeks ago. But then he noticed something that made his 4 eyes narrow with curiosity and the first hint of irritation. A boy stood apart from the crowd near the edge of the square, leaning against the wall of a storage building with his arms crossed over his chest, and his face showing no expression that Dravik could interpret. He was young, perhaps 16 years by human counting, with black hair that fell across his forehead, and dark eyes that watched the proceedings with an intensity that seemed wrong for someone his age. The boy was not kneeling, was not moving toward the square to join his fellow colonists in their submission. He was simply standing there, watching, as if he were observing something mildly interesting rather than the conquest of his entire world. "You there," Dravik called out, pointing one long finger toward the boy. "Come forward and kneel with the others." The humans in the square turned to look at the boy, their faces showing fear for him and confusion about why anyone would risk death by refusing such a simple command from their new masters. But the boy did not move except to tilt his head slightly to one side as if he were considering the request. And finding it somehow amusing, Dravik felt his irritation grow into something closer to anger, because he had conquered 17 worlds and countless millions of beings had knelt before him, and no one had ever simply stood there looking at him like this human child was doing right now. He stepped forward, his massive boots crushing the dirt beneath his feet as he approached the boy with slow, deliberate steps, designed to intimidate and terrify. His soldiers raised their weapons and trained them on the young human, ready to fire at their commanders, signal and end this small act of defiance before it could inspire others to similar foolishness. Dravik stopped 3 feet from the boy and looked down at him, using every bit of his impressive height and fearsome appearance to communicate the danger this child was placing himself in by refusing to obey. "I will not repeat myself again," Dravik said in a low voice that promised violence. "Kneel before me or die where you stand." "Human." The boy looked up at the towering alien commander, his dark eyes meeting those 4 glowing yellow orbs without flinching or showing any sign of the terror that Dravik expected to see. And then the boy smiled. It was not a smile of fear or madness or desperate bravery in the face of certain death. It was something else entirely. Something that Dravik had never seen on the face of a conquered being in all his years of service to the Dominion. It was the smile of someone who knew something that Dravik did not. "My name is Yunsung Park," the boy said in a calm, clear voice that carried across the silent square where every human held their breath and every Velthari soldier tightened their grip on their weapons. "And I have been waiting for you for a very long time." Dravik felt something he had not experienced in many years of warfare and conquest. He felt uncertain,